What is going on, everybody? Welcome to FISHTORY. I am Alexander Williamson, and today we are going to be talking about water changes. Yeah, water changes. What are they good for? Absolutely not. A few things, some important things. There's quite a few reasons why you would actually want to do water changes. And while I have videos talking about only doing water top-offs, not needing to do changes, a lot of the time that you spend with a tank that is not going to have a filter or not going to have water changes happening is watching it, observing it, testing parameters, and knowing when to step in and when you may need to do a water change or when you may need to change the pH with, crushed coral by making things harder. Or buffering things, or when you might want to drop the pH with, some botanicals, some leaves, or some wood. So let's go over the reasons why you might need or definitely want to do water changes. And I'm not talking about top-offs where you're just adding water back for the humidity. So let's clarify that right now. Whatever the humidity leaves your tank, that is not going to bring the particulate matter and the dissolved solids with it usually. It may bring a few of them, the lighter ones. But because of that, when you put water back in your tank, you either need to have very, very soft tap water that you're using, like under 30 parts per million, which I'm lucky enough to have here in Seattle in the Northwest. Meaning that I'm not adding more things and changing the TDS and just making the tank harder and harder over time. So you can either use rainwater in a lot of places, you can use distilled water, or you can use reverse osmosis water if you have one of those units, and do top-offs. And so most of my tanks right now are just doing top-offs on them. However, if you're growing certain plants, you're using CO2, there's a whole lot of reasons why you might want to do water changes, and let's talk about that. Everything from the hormones that are going on in your tank and the chemicals that plants make that are doing battle with one another, literally trying to compete for more space in the tank, over to things like just simple nitrate buildup or hardness buildup over time. Sometimes you just need to, there's no other way to deal with it other than just removing it and putting fresh water that's softer in. So let's go over it. Let's look at some tanks, and we'll talk about it all in this video.
All right, so the first and most obvious reason why you would want to do water changes is to handle either ammonia, nitrites, or nitrate spikes. Now, sometimes this can happen if, for instance, you're feeding the tank and all of a sudden the lid pops off and way too much food falls in. You try to clean it up and you just can't really, get enough out of there. Or if a fish passes away, or for some reason something really bad gets in the tank and a bunch of the plants are dying off, or the fish or shrimp, anything like that, all of that breaks down and will then impact your cycle. And unless you have, a massive excess of filtration, really there's not going to be a good way that is an outcome where your fish survive to get rid of that other than doing a water change. Your plants will eventually cycle through it, but it's going to take some time. So that's one obvious reason, and that is the reason why people do water changes most days, most tanks, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, or whatever. But when we're talking about water changes, most people will take out, 20% of the tank, and then they will refill it with water. Now, depending on where you live, that water will either have acidic, neutral, or alkaline properties, and then you will be putting that back into your tank. And if your tank has aqua soil, if it has crushed coral, it could have a low or a high pH. If you're keeping cichlids, you might have alkaline water. And if you're keeping a bunch of Amazonian fish, community fish from the tropics, probably going to have lower or neutral pH. And if you have lots of plants and substrate and wood, things like that, that's going to impact that. So when you change it, if your tap water is something substantially different, that also is kind of a shock to your system. Now, the water you put in is going to eventually settle within a short time, and it will find the difference. So if the pH is 8 out of the tap and 7 out of the tank, you're going to have 7.5 or something like that in your tank, roughly speaking, if you did a 50% water change. So the other thing is, sometimes people are trying to get certain desired outcomes, and they want their tank to be more acidic, or they want it to be more basic because they're basic or alkaline, same thing. And they do that because maybe the tap water is coming in really hard and they want to raise bettas, for instance, or they want to breed any number of these community fish that tend to live in neutral to softer or more acidic waters. And likewise, if you have live bears or guppies, you may want harder water. So you might add snail shells, crushed coral, things like that, or eggs or cuttlefish bone, so that your guppies, live bears, mollies, platies, whatever it may be, will be happier. And again, likewise, say that you're trying to keep your tank a little more on the alkaline side with a little more hardness. Well, if your tap water is really, really acidic, then you're going to need to either add crushed coral, do less water changes, or if you're trying to get more of the way your tap water is compared to your tanks, then you're going to want to do more water changes, obviously. So it's really something that you need to test, and then you need to figure out what your goals are. But that is an obvious one that most people know about, and they're doing it from a understanding of the nitrogen cycle. So let's talk about some of the stranger reasons why you might want to do this. Now, another reason you might want to do water changes is because, say you have a tank where you have some fish that you want to spawn. Classically, Amazonian fish like these arc pencilfish here, they don't spawn unless they have a cue that tells them it's the wet season. And the best way to do that is to suddenly change the TDS. And that's from going from hard water to soft water. And the only way you can do that is to add water quickly, or take out the particulate matter that's dissolved into the water, which means taking out the water, or running a distilled filter. And even then, that's not fast enough. That's not a shock of water. And really what you're trying to do is get them to think that the rain has started. The 2-3 inches an hour monsoon season rain has started, and that is going to be triggering their instincts for spawning. Now, likewise, a trick that a lot of old-time fish keepers use, and it's one that I really have found helpful, is you wait until any one fish is spawning in your setup. And once it's spawning, especially if it's in a smaller tank like this 10-gallon here, where I've got these Corydoras, which also I use as a quarantine tank, but right now it's a Corydora spawning tank. This is where I would wait for them to spawn, and when I see them spawn after doing one of those water changes where I'm suddenly changing the temperature, the TDS, the pH, all that stuff, and the flow for that matter, and their food for that matter, that is when I would watch them, and when they're doing their behavior of going up and down the glass, laying eggs, within a day or two of that period, I could then take that water and put it into this tank, like 3 to 5 gallons of water from that tank, and it very well may trigger the other fish in this tank to spawn. A lot of times when you get one species spawning, you'll get more. And that's due to convergent evolution of all these fish knowing that, oh, it's the wet season, so I'm sensing other fish spawning, I better start doing that too, because this is the time of year I do that. Or it's also due to straight up chemical signals telling the fish that, here's some estrogen, here's some testosterone. And the fish, likewise, like these two here, might start their courtship rituals, and they might start pairing off, and then, they'll know it's time to go to it and start doing what it is they do to spawn. So that's an old trick that angelfish breeders would often use plecos or corydoras, and they'd use all three in conjunction, and when one would spawn, or cribensis cribs, they'd use those as well. And it's a great little trick because it will set off those fish, which happen to also live together in the same wild environments too. So they're used to those species, other chemicals, telling them, oh, it's time to spawn. Now, another reason you might want to do this is in a filterless tank where you're just trying to keep oxygen and nutrients moving around, because in a completely still tank with no filter, no water changes, it can get very stagnant, and even the oxygen low down can become anoxic. And you may want that under your substrate in certain cases if that's what you're going for, but you definitely don't want that in your water column. And so in a filterless tank, doing water changes, or at the very minimum water top-offs, is a good way to kind of bring in some fresh nutrients, or that's a good time to dose liquid fertilizers in with the water, and also to just get oxygen and things moving around. Here you can see these grasses are actually putting off oxygen because they're photosynthesizing under the light. And likewise, these plants are up out of the water. They're immersed. This is Persicaria, and this Persicaria can take the atmospheric oxygen and carbon and easily use that to grow. However, underwater, there's water in the way, and so they have to use the gas trapped within the water column and absorb that. And so oftentimes, if the water's not moving enough, you need to get it to move around a little more for plants like, for instance, this is the Salzmani bacopa, and this needs lots of nutrients and also high light, but it also needs oxygen exchange to start those processes, to get those bright colors. So oftentimes plant enthusiasts will be doing water changes, sometimes even daily, to keep up the aquascapes that you see in magazines and online, when you see a really awe-inspiring aquascape that just seems otherworldly. So you might want to be doing this for rare aquatic plants. They may not even be that rare, but in your area you may just not have optimal conditions. So for instance, certain plants like kabamba will melt really badly in very hard water. Other plants want harder water. Things like Anubias, Java fern can handle a lot harder water, and alkaline water as well. Beyond that, there are plants that have evolved, like this Colombian plant that is found in rivers in remote regions in Colombia, that actually needs flow from a river, and it needs crazy intense sunlight, and also it needs the oxygenation that comes with either running a heavy filter and or air pump, bubble wand, power head, or just changing the water frequently as well. And also it needs very, very trace amounts of nutrients. It doesn't need a heavy load of nutrients. It needs the bare minimum, but constantly flowing over its leaves. And there are plants that are like this. There are plants that need the exact opposite. But all across the spectrum, you have people trying to grow difficult plants for different aquascapes or different tanks. And some of the really crazy professional tanks you see, it could be because of this, that they're doing a lot of water changes, or they have extra power heads, or whatever it may be. And there's really no way around it. You can't cheat it. You can't just leave the same water in there. Now, one more note about plants is that some of them do actual warfare with one another. So they actually release chemicals that can melt or even kill off the foliage of other plants. So things like, for instance, Valsinaria, some crypts, and duckweed, they actually try to compete with one another. The val knows that it doesn't want duckweed clouding out it's light. And so it will actually put chemicals in the water that are that stunt the growth of the duckweed. So there are all sorts of different interactions like this, especially when there's new plants that we just don't really know very well, new exotic plants in the hobby that we're always, getting interested in. We just don't know what sorts of little battles and struggles are going on between plants. And it's safer than sorry to just do water changes. In almost all of the high-end aquascapes, you'll hear that they're using aqua soil, filtration, very high lighting, liquid dosing, CO2, and they're doing water changes usually once a week, if not 3, 4, 5, every day a week. So something to look into, especially if you're doing estimative index EI dosing of fertilizers. That's when you measure out each element, put it in the water for your plant's custom. You design a custom regimen, and then once they have had a chance to absorb those nutrients levels in the water are going to be a little bit lower. So then you need to change the water so you can start all over again with no nutrients in the water. And then you'll fill up the water and pH, GH, KH, all those things, minerality, temperature, flow, oxygen, CO2, you'll then allow to come up over the course of a couple hours after the water change, and then you'll add those specially measured each type of fertilizers back into the water so that those plants are consistently getting that throughout the week. Then you'll do another water change very soon. Now, some people think this needs to be done every few days. Others will go once a week, maybe even 2 weeks, but it's usually a pretty consistent and a frequent occurrence to be changing the water when that's going on, when you're doing that sort of regimen to bring out the brightest colors and to raise very tricky to raise plants. Now, there are fish that also just need more water changes because of their diet, for one. So like these plecos, they happen to be omnivores. They eat wood, they eat plants, they eat meat, and they also eat things that have died. So anything that's down on the ground that they're eating and so forth is going to produce quite a bit of ammonia. And just in trying to get them to eat, if you're growing them out, you may be putting quite a heavy weight on your tank and its filter and all the other fish as well, because lots of nitrates are going to build up pretty quickly. And unless you have a strong light and lots of plants that are feeding out of the water column, you're not going to be taking care of that and getting rid of that. And your filter only has so much surface area that it can work with, whether you're doing like a planum setup or a hang off the back or a sponge, doesn't really matter. It can only move the water so much, depending on, the type you're using. And so oftentimes a water change is the slight shock or slight refreshment that the actual fish will need for their species. Rainbow fish are another one that oftentimes just don't grow properly also without that change, and it's because in the wild they have constant flowing rivers, and they may get waves of nutrients or waves of food and nitrates that are a little higher, and then on days when it rains or when it's sunny out versus when it's not. I mean, these parameters change in the wild. Even in lakes, there's cycles throughout the day, and so you may have fish that need very particular settings, so to speak, or parameters, and doing those water changes is just one of the ways that certain species may absolutely need that. For instance, these Apistogramma megoptera here, they need the botanicals and the acidic water, and they also need stagnant water. So that's also true of a lot of fish like bettas and things, like these wild bettas down here. They may actually need the opposite. They may need no water changes. They may prefer no filter and only ambient light that is not direct. But knowing your fish is going to be the key to knowing what is right in all of these situations. And, you know, from light to flow to nutrients to nitrates, there's different tolerances for every species of plant and fish. And if you want them to spawn, if you want them not to spawn, whatever it may be, whatever your goal is, you need to do the research and find out what is optimal, and check several sources. Now, one of the last reasons why you would want to change your water and do water changes, even in a tank that's, say, filterless or low tech. This one has no filter on it, just a actual floodlight from a house that's LED. And we've got some fish in here, and we've got quite a few shrimp in here and some snails. But in here, what you would be aiming for might be that, say, you're treating for a parasite or ick or something like that on the fish in here, or maybe Scutularis japonica on the shrimp, which are like little leeches that get on their nose and on their head oftentimes, and legs. And you may need to use something, or for instance, planaria and hydra, scuds right here. Here's a pest that shouldn't be in this tank. And yes, you can manually remove them, but in a lot of cases, an infestation's gotten out of hand, and you need to just dose it with something like no planaria or like ICX or whatever it may be. You may be wanting to do that. And in those cases, you're going to need to either have a filter that you put charcoal into to clean out that medication when you're ready to have it out of that ecosystem, or you're going to need to do water changes. And for me, I don't mess with the charcoal usually. I just do a big old water change, and that usually removes most of the medications. But here you can see that scud is bugging those shrimp. It's kind of hanging out on them, trying to eat any excess sheds they have or any food they drop. And so I'm probably going to dose this tank pretty soon with something to try to take care of that. They also eat the baby berries, as we call them, or baby shrimp eggs from the mother shrimp. So sometimes there's no way around. The best way to deal with this, which is going to be doing a water change once the medication has taken its course and you're ready to remove it.
Thank you so much for joining me, you guys. I really appreciate it. As always, showing your support for the channel just by watching to the end of these videos means a whole lot to me. And I'd like to hear from you. On every video, I like to hear ideas for new videos and topics you guys want covered or clarified. If I can help out, I will. Or I will find someone who does have the information and we'll bring them on. So, yeah, I hope you guys all have a wonderful holiday season, and I will talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much, and don't forget to hit the little thumb and the bell on the way out if you're so inclined. Have a good one. Bye, guys.